Lieutenant Commander Takeshi Matsumura stood watch aboard submarine I-36, scanning the American anchorage through the periscope. What he saw defied every calculation the Imperial Naval Staff had made about American capabilities. Floating in the lagoon was not just a fleet, but an entire industrial city at sea. The notebook in his breast pocket contained sketches and observations that would shake the Japanese High Command to its core. Through the lens, he counted 6 massive floating structures, each larger than any dry dock in Japan. One held the battleship USS Alabama, raised completely out of the water, its hull swarming with workers and equipment. Another cradled 2 cruisers simultaneously. The Americans had brought their shipyards to the war zone. In his coded report that night, Matsumura wrote words that would haunt Japanese naval planning. "They repair ships faster than our kamikaze can damage them. This is not war. This is mathematics we cannot win." The structures Matsumura observed were auxiliary floating dry docks, the AFDB series, each section manufactured in different American shipyards and towed across the Pacific to be assembled like massive steel puzzles. AFDB 2 alone stretched 927 feet long, capable of lifting 90,000 tons. When fully operational with its crew of 600 men, it possessed machine shops, foundries, electrical repair facilities, and storage for 65,000 gallons of fuel oil. The dock generated its own electricity, distilled its own fresh water, and operated with the efficiency of a major naval shipyard. What Lieutenant Commander Matsumura could not see from his periscope were the other revelations that would have shattered Japanese naval doctrine even further. Scattered across the Pacific were 7 major Advance Base Sectional Docks and 31 smaller auxiliary floating docks, transforming every captured atoll into a potential Pearl Harbor. 3 weeks before Pearl Harbor, in the conference room of the Japanese Naval General Staff in Tokyo, Vice Admiral Osami Nagano had presented the final war plans. The calculations seemed flawless. America possessed 8 major naval shipyards on the Pacific coast. Mare Island in California could handle 4 capital ships simultaneously. Puget Sound Naval Shipyard in Washington, 3. Pearl Harbor's facilities, the closest to the war zone, could manage perhaps 6 major repairs at once. The mathematics appeared favorable. If Japanese forces could damage or sink 20 American capital ships in the first 6 months, it would take the Americans at least 18 months to repair and replace them. Ships would have to steam 3,000 miles back to the west coast for major repairs. The journey alone would take 2 weeks each way, removing vessels from combat for months. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, despite his reservations about war with America, had signed off on these estimates. His operations officer, Commander Kameto Kuroshima, had presented charts showing American industrial capacity. The United States produced 1.5 million tons of merchant shipping in 1941. Japan produced 400,000 tons. But naval construction was different, Kuroshima argued. Warships required specialized facilities, skilled workers, specific materials. The bottleneck would be dock space and repair facilities, not raw industrial power. They had not imagined that Americans would simply build new shipyards and float them to the battle zone. The story of American floating dry docks began with commercial necessity. In 1927, the United States Navy commissioned its first self-docking floating dry dock, YFD-2. Unlike fixed dry docks carved from granite and concrete, floating dry docks operated on ballast principles. Pump water out and they rose. Flood the tanks and they sank. A ship could sail over a submerged dock, which would then lift the vessel completely clear of the water. By 1940, naval planners realized this technology, scaled massively and made mobile, could eliminate geography as a constraint in naval warfare. The Bureau of Ships initiated a program that seemed impossible even to American engineers. Build floating dry docks large enough to handle battleships. Make them in sections for ocean transport. Design them to operate independently in remote locations. The Advance Base Sectional Dock program represented American industrial organization at its most audacious. Section A would be built at Everett Pacific Shipbuilding in Washington. Sections B and C at Chicago Bridge and Iron in California. Sections D through G at Mare Island Naval Shipyard. Each section weighed 3,850 tons and measured 93 feet long, 165 feet wide, and 75 feet deep. 10 sections together would create a floating dock capable of lifting an Iowa-class battleship. The engineering challenges seemed insurmountable. Each section needed to be strong enough to withstand Pacific storms during towing, yet precise enough to be welded to its neighboring sections with tolerances measured in millimeters. The ballast systems had to work in perfect synchronization. The docks required machine shops capable of manufacturing any replacement part, from propeller shafts to gun barrels. Commander Tamechi Hara, captain of the destroyer Shigura, witnessed American repair capabilities firsthand when his ship engaged U.S. forces near Tulagi in March 1943. In his post-war memoir, he recalled, "We had damaged the cruiser USS Helena with a torpedo hit. Our intelligence reported she would require 6 months in a stationary dock. 3 weeks later, she appeared in our reconnaissance photos at Tulagi, fully operational, guns firing at our aircraft. We could not understand. Where was the dry dock? We saw only empty ocean and small islands." The Helena had been repaired by ABSD-1, assembled at Espiritu Santo just weeks earlier. The dock had lifted the 10,000-ton cruiser completely out of the water, repaired the 20-foot gash in her hull, and returned her to service in 19 days. The same repair at Yokosuka Naval Arsenal would have taken 4 months. Captain Hara's confusion reflected a fundamental misunderstanding that plagued Japanese naval planning. They conceived of naval bases as fixed installations with permanent facilities built over decades. Yokosuka Naval Arsenal, Japan's premier facility, had been under construction since 1866. The Americans had created equivalent capability in 6 months and floated it to the front lines. Admiral Chester Nimitz understood that floating dry docks transformed the arithmetic of attrition warfare. In a memo to Admiral Ernest King dated January 15, 1943, Nimitz wrote, "The availability of floating dry docks in forward areas fundamentally alters the correlation of forces. A damaged ship repaired in 3 weeks at Ulithi versus 3 months in San Francisco represents a 4-fold increase in available force strength." The Japanese discovered this new reality gradually. The Battle of Santa Cruz in October 1942 had severely damaged the carrier USS Enterprise. Japanese naval intelligence estimated 6 months for repairs. The Enterprise reappeared in combat after just 30 days, repaired at New Caledonia by destroyer tender USS Vestal and Advance Base facilities. Rear Admiral Matomi Ugaki wrote in his diary, "The enemy's repair capabilities exceed our intelligence estimates by factors we cannot explain. Ships we confirm as severely damaged return to battle before our own lightly damaged vessels complete repairs." By early 1943, the United States Navy operated a network of floating repair facilities that transformed the Pacific. Advanced Base Sectional Docks operated at Espiritu Santo, Ulithi, Leyte Gulf, and Manus. Smaller floating dry docks serviced destroyers and submarines at dozens of locations. The construction statistics revealed Japan's hopeless position. Mare Island Naval Shipyard produced multiple ABSD sections while simultaneously building new destroyers and cruisers. The shipyard employed 46,000 workers operating 3 shifts, 24 hours a day. In 18 months, Mare Island alone produced more floating dry dock capacity than Japan's entire permanent dry dock infrastructure. Lieutenant Commander Haruki Iki, a naval architect at Yokosuka Arsenal, analyzed American repair capabilities in early 1944. His report calculated that American floating dry docks in the Pacific could simultaneously repair 18 capital ships, 36 cruisers, and over 100 destroyers. Japan's entire domestic repair capacity could handle 6 capital ships, 12 cruisers, and 40 destroyers. More critically, Iki identified the multiplication effect of forward repair. A ship damaged at Leyte Gulf and repaired at Ulithi returned to combat in 1/4 the time of a ship sailing to Japan. His conclusion was stark. "We are fighting an enemy who brings his homeland to the battlefield. We cannot sink ships faster than they repair them." The floating dry docks achieved their first spectacular demonstration during the invasion of Kwajalein in February 1944. The battleship USS Maryland took kamikaze hits that tore a 40-foot hole in her deck. Traditional doctrine would have sent her to Pearl Harbor, removing her from action for months. Instead, Maryland sailed 240 miles to Mayuro Atoll, where AFDB-2 waited, the massive dock commanded by Commander Joseph J. Rochefort, not to be confused with Commander Joseph Rochefort, the intelligence officer who broke Japanese codes, submerged its deck, allowing Maryland to position herself over the keel blocks. In 4 hours, powerful pumps expelled 8 million gallons of water, raising the 45,000-ton battleship clear of the ocean. Captain Yoshitake Miwa, commanding Submarine 184, observed the operation and radioed Tokyo. Maryland entering floating dock at Mayuro. Extensive damage visible. Estimate minimum 3 months repair. 3 weeks later, Maryland departed Mayuro under own power. Full combat capability apparent. The Americans have made time and distance irrelevant. Commander Mochitsura Hashimoto of Submarine 158 later wrote, "We would successfully attack an American carrier or battleship, calculate the months needed for repair, only to encounter the same ship weeks later, fully operational. It was like fighting mythical creatures that healed their wounds instantly." AFDB-7, operating at Leyte Gulf, demonstrated complete overhaul capability with the carrier USS Franklin after devastating kamikaze damage in March 1945. The Franklin had suffered the most severe damage of any U.S. carrier to survive the war. 807 sailors had died in the attack. Standard procedure would have written Franklin off as a total loss. But AFDB-7's crew of 1,000 included specialists in every aspect of ship construction. They operated shift schedules that never stopped. Master Chief Petty Officer William Delaney later testified, "We essentially rebuilt that ship from the inside out." In a stationary yard with full facilities, it was a 6-month job minimum. We did it in 11 weeks in a combat zone. Lieutenant Commander Sadao Kusaka flew reconnaissance missions over American bases. His April 1944 report revealed the strategic shock. Observed Ulithi anchorage in detail. Counted 6 large floating structures previously identified as possible cargo vessels. Upon closer examination, these are mobile dry docks. One contains battleship Iowa, hull exposed for repair. American maintenance capacity is not fixed but mobile. They bring their bases with them. Admiral Toyoda, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet after Yamamoto's death, received these reports with desperation. At a staff meeting in May 1944, he presented the reality of defeat. If Americans repair ships 3 times faster than us, we must sink 9 ships for every one we lose. This is impossible. We are losing to American floating steel and industrial organization. Each dock section included living quarters for its crew, complete with bunks, galleys, and medical facilities. Seaman First Class Robert Leckie, assigned to AFDB-3 at Manus, described daily life. "Here we were, thousands of miles from home, living on this massive steel structure. We had movie nights on the dock walls, baseball games on the floor when no ship was in. We weren't just repairing ships, we were a floating piece of America." The food served on floating dry docks became legendary. While combat ships subsisted on spam and powdered eggs, the dry docks maintained frozen food lockers and full bakeries. AFDB-2's Thanksgiving dinner in 1944 served 2,000 turkey dinners to crews of damaged ships under repair. Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita experienced the strategic impact during the Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944. His battle plan assumed damaged American ships would withdraw for repairs, weakening the invasion force. Instead, damaged vessels sailed to nearby mobile repair facilities and returned within days. Kurita later wrote, "We would damage an American cruiser, assume it eliminated for weeks, only to face the same ship 3 days later. We were fighting not just the American fleet, but their entire industrial system, which they had somehow made portable." The most remarkable pre-deployment feat occurred with USS Yorktown at Coral Sea and Midway. Yorktown, severely damaged at Coral Sea, arrived at Pearl Harbor on May 27, 1942. Admiral Nimitz gave repair crews 72 hours. The ship entered Dry Dock No. 1 on May 28, and 1,400 workers from Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard labored around the clock. Yorktown sailed on May 30, her flight deck patched and boilers operational. Japanese intelligence remained convinced Yorktown was still under repair. When pilots reported attacking a third carrier at Midway, Admiral Nagumo's staff couldn't believe it. Lieutenant Joichi Tomonaga reported before his death, "The Americans possessed 3 carriers where we calculated only 2 were possible." By mid-1944, American floating dry docks had transformed the Pacific into an American maintenance highway. Ships damaged at Iwo Jima could be repaired at Guam. Vessels hit at Okinawa found floating docks at Kerama-Retto. Commander Sadatoshi Tomioka calculated the strategic impact. The enemy has eliminated distance. A ship damaged at Formosa can be repaired at Leyte faster than we can repair a ship damaged at Leyte and return to Sasebo. We are fighting an enemy who has made geography irrelevant. Between 1942 and 1945, the United States produced 7 Advance Base Sectional Docks, 31 auxiliary floating docks, and 55 smaller auxiliary repair docks. The combined lifting capacity exceeded Japan's entire permanent dry dock capacity by a factor of 4. Each ABSD cost approximately $40 million to build and deploy, equivalent to a light cruiser. Rear Admiral Kizo Kimura captured this in his diary. The Americans build floating dry docks the size of city blocks and tow them across the Pacific as if certain of victory. They are already building the peace while we still fight the war. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Thompson, a hull repair specialist on AFDB-2, had trained for 18 months at Mare Island. His team of 40 welders could repair torpedo damage that would have challenged major shipyards. "We became artists of destruction repair," Thompson recalled. "Destroyer with her bow blown off, we'd fabricate an entire new front end in 5 days." The medical facilities on floating dry docks added strategic value. Each major dock included a hospital with operating rooms. Dr. Lawrence Steinberg, Chief Medical Officer on AFDB-1, performed over 200 major surgeries during deployment. In November 1944, submarine Y-365 received orders to penetrate Ulithi and attack the floating dry docks rather than warships. The mission reflected new priorities. The submarine was destroyed before reaching Ulithi, one of 6 lost attempting to attack floating repair facilities. The only successful Japanese attack occurred on April 22, 1945. Lieutenant Saburo Shimbo and Ensign Chuhei Okubo, flying at 14,000 feet, mistook empty floating dry docks, a BSD-2 and a BSD-4 for aircraft carriers. A follow-up attack damaged ABSD-2's Section G, but the dock's crew completed repairs within 3 days. Commander Masataka Okumiya analyzed the failure. "We could occasionally damage warships, but the floating dry docks multiplied like organisms. They were not just floating docks, but floating factories that could reproduce themselves." The Okinawa campaign from April to June 1945 saw the most concentrated damage of the Pacific War. Over 400 ships were damaged by kamikaze attacks. A fleet of floating dry docks at Kerama-Retto operated continuously, sometimes lifting damaged ships while still under air attack. Captain Toshiyuki Yokoi, commanding kamikaze operations, recorded, "Our pilots sacrificed their lives to damage American ships, only to see the same vessels returning within days. The floating dry docks at Kerama repair ships faster than we can organize new attacks." Of 404 ships damaged at Okinawa, 387 were repaired sufficiently to continue operations without returning to permanent bases. The destroyer USS Laffey, hit by 6 kamikazes on April 16, was operational again by May 1. Captain Minoru Genda reviewed captured American planning documents after the war. They intended to bring 12 major floating dry docks and 40 smaller ones to Japanese waters for the invasion. Even if we damaged half their fleet daily, they could repair ships faster than we could reload our guns. Working with battle-damaged ships meant handling unexploded ordnance and toxic smoke. On AFDB-3, 7 workers died when a bulkhead collapsed during repairs on USS Pittsburgh. Yet morale remained high. The motto of AFDB-2, painted in letters 10 feet high, read, "We keep 'em fighting." Admiral Toyoda's post-war interrogation identified 3 decisive factors in Japan's defeat: American submarine warfare, fast carrier task forces, and floating dry docks. On the third factor, Your floating dry docks killed the Japanese Navy as surely as your bombs and torpedoes. You made time and distance irrelevant. You brought your homeland's industrial power to our home waters. Between 1943 and 1945, American floating dry docks performed 1,847 major ship repairs and 8,234 minor repairs. They returned 95% of damaged vessels to service within 30 days. Commander Joseph Rochefort, the intelligence officer whose code-breaking helped win Midway, offered insight. The Japanese thought they were fighting ships and men. They were actually fighting our entire industrial system, which we had made portable. Every floating dry dock was Detroit, and Pittsburgh made manifest in steel that floated. The organizational vision came from officers like Rear Admiral Ben Moriel, who understood that American industrial superiority meant nothing unless projected to the point of conflict. His vision transformed industrial power from a homeland advantage into a deployed weapons system. Mare Island Naval Shipyard employed 6,000 women by 1943. Marjorie Muller, one of the first female welders, worked on a BSD-2's Section F. Every perfect weld meant American sailors would live. The Chicago Bridge and Iron Company employed 4,000 African-American workers at its California facility, where they built 3 ABSD sections, achieving production rates that exceeded some integrated yards. Admiral Arleigh Burke frequently cited floating dry docks as examples of American innovation. The Japanese brought superior training and tactical excellence. We brought floating dry docks. They made the ocean a battlefield. We made it a factory floor. Japanese naval attachés had reported on American shipbuilding throughout the 1930s, but interpreted it through their own experience. Commander Yoshiro Fujimura visited Chicago Bridge and Iron and observed sectional construction. His report noted, "Americans build industrial plants like toys, in sections to be assembled." Interesting but irrelevant to naval construction. As the war ended, American floating dry docks were still being produced. AFDB 8-14 were under construction for the invasion that never came. The story of American floating dry docks represents fundamentally different concepts of power. Japan conceived power in traditional terms: warrior skill, tactical excellence. America conceived power in industrial terms: production capacity, repair capability. The Pacific War tested these competing visions. Once American floating dry docks deployed across the Pacific, each represented the entire American industrial system made mobile. They were Detroit's assembly lines and Pittsburgh's steel mills brought to the battle zone. Against such industrial might, no amount of traditional military excellence could prevail. Admiral Toyoda's final assessment captures their ultimate significance. You defeated us the moment your floating dry docks arrived in the Pacific. We could sink your ships, but you could raise them. They meant you could suffer any losses and continue fighting. The Pacific Ocean itself had become an American lake, not because you controlled it, but because you could maintain your control anywhere, anytime. We realized we were not fighting ships and planes and men, but an entire industrial system that had learned to float.